This is actually my drive to work. It's the middle of the day, but I'm now basically at the road where I would be normally for coming back to work. I had some meetings. The meeting that I was just at was related to my position on the school board. One of the biggest issues we have in California, actually I'm going to take this out so I can hear better. One of the biggest issues we have in California with regards to schools is funding. California, when I think adjusted for cost of living factors, is about 46th in the country in per pupil funding. We get somewhere between $8,000 and $9,000 per student per year to educate them. By contrast, the state of New York, which is number one, has $20,000 per student per year. So when people talk about the issues of education, how come we don't have better teachers, how come we don't have better facilities, all this other stuff, we're at a huge disadvantage when you compare us to other states. And I think we're actually doing a pretty amazing job considering we are so far down. A few years ago, Governor Jerry Brown wanted to do what he calls local control funding. So he wanted to give more control to the local school districts about how to spend their money. It used to be that when we got our money, there was what were called categoricals, and these categoricals were pretty much career tech education, special education, English as a second language, and just dozens and dozens of these things. So what happened was schools were very restricted on how they could spend their money because most of their money was being spent on things they had no control over because the state said, you will spend this much money on this, you'll spend this much money on that. So he wanted to eliminate all of that. He actually bowed to some special interests, so there are a few categoricals left, but in general there's far fewer. So it is good. He has actually done something good there about removing the restrictions and allowing us to choose how to spend our money to a far greater extent. But the big problem is in 2008, or I should say really 2009, because 2008 was the peak. 2009 is when the economic downturn hit, and we had a obviously significant recession that I think all of you guys remember, and funding for schools actually dropped. It wasn't supposed to, but California basically deferred the money, and they said, well, we know we owe you this money, but we're going to defer it to some future year, and we'll get it catch up at some point. And with Jerry Brown's local control funding formula, he also pledged getting back to those 2008 levels within a certain number of years. That was supposed to then end, that certain number of years was going to be about 2 years from now. The economy's done very well, so we actually have this year the promise to get back to the 2008 levels of funding. And so the problem is now the public and certain legislators and people in government are saying, well, school funding, the problem is solved. You're back to where you needed to be. You are now fully funded. That's the big thing. We're fully funded. That pause to the 2008 levels. So schools are now where we were 10 years ago. So biggest issue is, well, expenses aren't where they were 10 years ago. We have a huge obligation in retirement that the state has pushed off onto the schools. So we're now at the same level we were before, but we have 30-40% more increased fixed costs that we have no control over. So at the same time, we're expected to be able to give raises, keep employees because they're going off to other states, add technology. There's a lot of technological requirements that we have for schools now. Testing is done on computers instead of paper and scantrons and putting stuff through. So you actually have to have a computer for every student during testing. A lot of schools will rotate through. We were able to use bond money to get Chromebooks, so every student actually has their own Chromebook, but those are needed for taking these tests. In 5 years, well, we're going to have to buy new Chromebooks because all the Chromebooks will be out of date. We actually buy some new every year because we're just rotating through so we don't have big fixed balloon costs. But those are costs that we wouldn't have to incur if we didn't have these requirements for some of these modernizations, electronic textbooks that Jerry Brown wants us to have, and everything else. So the schools are being told, you've got local control, you can fund whatever you want, however you want to fund it, and you are fully funded. But we actually have less money than we did before. So we are really struggling, and it's an issue, and it's something that hopefully will be addressed in the legislature. There's a bill that's in work. No idea how popular it's going to be, but it is set to help address this and increase the base funding that all schools get. And if that is funded, that would bring us somewhere around mid-pack in the country in per pupil funding by adding another $2,000 per pupil. It's pretty amazing that you can add $2,000 per pupil and get us up to middle from 46th. But there's a lot of students in the state that those dollars, that's a lot of money, and that's going to be the hard thing. It's really easy to convince people, yes, you can spend money on schools, great. Okay, where's that money coming from? Well, that's the other thing. We don't want to increase taxes, and so how are we going to get the money? And so that's the problem that's going to need to be partially solved. The other issue is the marketing of it to get people to understand that fully funded does not mean that we have enough money to do the things that we're required to do. So there's your little education on school finance. I could probably spend another hour or two talking about school finance because it's a very complicated subject. But waiting for traffic because somebody else moved. But that is it. Once again, this is Brad Waller signing off, and I will see you next time.